الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. Okay, we're starting from here today. Modern psychology has only recently begun to realize the importance of a careful study of the contents of mystic consciousness. By obviously is using all Orientalist terms. Mystic. Mysticism, there's a basic difference between mysticism and tasawwuf, and mystic consciousness and Sufi consciousness. And obviously, he's not taking that into consideration. Now, mystic consciousness, mysticism and tasawwuf, I think there are two basic differences. The mysticism is just a body of knowledge and experiences which involves yourself and some sort of transcendent experience. So that can be body of knowledge, is both theoretical as well as practical. All religions have it, and non-religions have it as well. But what differentiates those from, and obviously Islamic tradition of tasawwuf has learned from other tradition like Islamic fiqh and kalam, and other disciplines have learned from other non-Islamic or a-Islamic traditions. But there's a fundamental difference between tasawwuf and mysticism is that mysticism is sort of spirituality, but in general, tasawwuf integrates spirituality with Islamic morality. And that combination is what leads to tazkiyatul nafs. Mere spirituality cannot lead to tazkiyatul nafs. It can give you some generic powers like other physical. So it's like spirituality on its own is like people go to gym to tone their body. So people have these spiritual things to tone their inner self and inner experiences and gain powers in that respect. But that's just like a power like any other power, like your body power. If you're training it to use it in jihad, for example, for good causes, that's totally different. Similarly, you can understand Islamic spirituality in that way. So in tasawwuf, this is a disintegration of spirituality with Islamic morality. The purpose is to inculcate Islamic morality, and through which clean and purify yourself so that it can become capable or worthy of how much it can of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and becoming a container of or receptor of or spectacle for the reception of Anwar Ilahiyya, Anwar Muhammadiyya, etc. So that this is one fundamental difference, and obviously another difference is that Islamic, then tasawwuf as a whole, is subservient to the limits put by um, Sharia, for example. Sharia in more narrow sense. Otherwise, Sharia in a broader sense include tasawwuf as well, obviously. Okay, so modern psychology has only recently begun to realize the importance of a careful study of the contents of mystic consciousness, and we are not yet in possession of a really effective scientific method to analyze the contents of non-rational modes of consciousness. In non-rational non-rational mode of consciousness, how can you have a scientific method for that? Obviously at some point we have to more closely try to understand what scientific method is. But scientific method, historically speaking, obviously it obviously it considered non-rational, but here by non-rational what he might mean, because not by non-rational we can mean even sense experience, so it depends on what you mean by rational. And is psychology there to study obviously psychology studies consciousness, but scientific methodic materialism, or methodic animalism is historically part and parcel of psychology. So how far it is possible for psychology to even have a glimpse of those experiences is an open question. Anyway, with the time at my disposal, it is not possible to undertake an extensive inquiry into the history and the various degrees of mystic consciousness in point of richness and vividness. Into history and the various degree of mystic consciousness. So that's what mystic consciousness is a much larger category than Sufi or Sufi consciousness, for example, or Sufiyaic consciousness, because ulama tasawwuf, when they came to India, for example, mystics were in India for thousands of years, but Sufis just came with Islam. So there's a fundamental distinction between, which is not to deny that Sufis are Sufi masters. They learned from mystics of India and things like that, as Mutakallimin learned from Christian theologians and Persian and Greek philosophers and Arab pagan philosophers and things like that, or our fuqaha learned from other traditions, etc. So that's like normal in Islamic disciplines, but that doesn't mean they are the same things. Anyway, so with the time at my disposal, it is not possible to undertake an extensive inquiry into the history of the various degrees of mystic consciousness and point of richness and vividness. And that's another question: is if you didn't have the experience like mukashifat, what Imam Ghazali, for example, say ilm al-mukashifa, if you didn't have practical, if you didn't have kashf or ilham or arroya sadika, and if you didn't have basic training in ilm tasawwuf, then it's an open question whether you can understand those experiences. So if a person really want to study tasawwuf, Sufi consciousness, he should study tasawwuf first, and then do through those exercises. And obviously you can't have tasawwuf without studying other Islamic disciplines as well. And then you study, for example, Maktubat Imam Rabbani in our tradition, and see, because Maktubat Imam Rabbani is at least a partial register of his experiences. And then you talk about Sufi consciousness. And obviously, as far as I can see, Allama Iqbal doesn't have any of these. So it's totally abstract, based on a study, Islamic tradition and Western tradition in just an abstract manner. But when you talk about experiences, if you don't have those experiences, it's very hard to. Because how can you talk about experiences of prophethood unless you are a prophet or you saw a prophet? So that's why so the experience of revelation is narrated to us by either in the word of the Prophet ﷺ or the description of those who saw him when revelation used to come to him, or whether it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In his book he describes the facts about revelation in general. So it's the similar way, if you are not a Sufi, if you don't have a training in those disciplines, if you didn't have practiced those disciplines, then how can you, similar way, if you are not a faqih, how can you judge or comment on fiqh tracks, for example? I mean, you can practically, but there's not much worth of it, especially tasawwuf, because it's a practical discipline in many ways, in ways in which other disciplines are not necessarily that practical, or applied discipline, I should say, in a way that in which others. I mean, for example, probably surf and nahv are more like tasawwuf in a sense that you can know all the syntax and all the morphology, but unless you have applied and practiced, you would have no idea how it works in just abstract. Yeah, I mean, you might have an idea, but actual practically applying it is totally different thing. Okay, so now he's saying all that I can do is to offer a few general observations only on the main characteristics of mixed experience. Main character. Now we don't know how is he he has gleaned these, and which type of literature is in it. Is it because he hasn't made a distinction between mystic and Sufi consciousness? I don't know which sources that he is drawing on, but we will just look at it first, just quickly and superficially, and then probably we'll come back to these points again to have a bit more thorough understanding if needed or if possible. Okay. I think now he's going to explain the main characteristics. So probably we'll look at this in another session. So today was just a preamble to these points he's going to make.